I'm not going to take 30 minutes because I found that the questions usually are more interesting than me speaking. I will say that you'll probably hear those adorable kids at some point because they're making a lot of noise upstairs. Um, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who I am, how I came to the work, and why the work is what it is, and to go from there. So, uh, 2000. And I'm excited to be here. I'm originally from New York, and like New York, we didn't pay much attention. Completely wrong. But I had a job in Milford at what was the Milford Power Project, the power plant that went up and took way too long in the late '90s and early 2000s, and that's what brought me here. And I never looked at politics as something I was going to participate in because the place where I grew up wasn't a place where that was just a thought. And actually, the thing that I was doing at the time in engineering wasn't something I thought I was going to do either, which is just another lesson about how life gives you things that you don't necessarily think you're going to do that you wind up doing. But the real way that I wind up here is like many other people. My story doesn't begin with me. My story begins before me, a long time before me. And I've been thinking a lot lately about um, something James Baldwin talked about towards the end of his life, and that was the concept of the eating of time and how much time does it take. How much time do we have to give for people to figure out their own progress? Um, and as I thought about that, I reflected on stories I didn't know but have come to know since my mother passed. My mother passed in 2012, and after her passing, I spoke a lot about what that was, the experience of her passing, and she died over the course of a number of years. But at the end of her life, I spent time with her in the hospital, and during that time, what I experienced was my mother telling me about what she had wanted to do with her life and how that thing that she wanted to do lined up with some of the work that I was doing. Um, and basically, she was telling me that from her perspective, she had failed. Are you having problems hearing me? I will try to see if I can do something about that. Um, but my mother was telling me that from her perspective she had failed, and if I were with my mother right now I would be able to easily tell her why she didn't fail, but in those moments I was incapable of doing anything other than sitting there shocked. um, but one thing that I learned about my mother, and I kind of knew, you don't put things together. My mother was Araminta and her mother was Harriet and her mother was Araminta. Now I knew that was a fact, right? um, but I didn't really recognize what those names meant, nor what it meant to my mother. There was a woman who was born Arminta Boston. We know her as Harriet Tubman. She had those two names, right? And what I came to understand was that the importance of my mother's name to what she wanted to do was critical. My mother wanted to do the work of going back to help people who didn't have the ability to leave situations they were in, who didn't have the fortune that she had. And I'm looking to do that work. And so, what I would say to my mother now, if I had the chance, is that I don't get to do this work except that you raised me to be the person that I am, right? That's like, it's so much common sense, and yet it's not. Hello? I don't know what happened there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. I'm
Yeah.
thinking maybe it would be helpful if more of us turned off our video so that, because I know sometimes having everybody's faces takes up a lot of bandwidth. Um, I don't know. That's
That
just
we could try that. So I don't know where it dropped out. But my point was that I learned that the work that I had been doing was connected to my mother's story, and that was really the work of helping people who didn't have the opportunity to get out, who didn't have the opportunities that I had. You know, for me, politics wasn't what I intended to do. But when I came to Connecticut, I walked around the city of New Haven, and when I walked around New Haven in the early 2000s, I didn't like what I was seeing. I could clearly see the distinctions between communities. I knew based on the distinctions I was seeing what race the people were in the communities I was looking at, and I wanted to get involved, but I struggled because I was working for a company where I was working 14, 15 hours a day, and there's not much you're going to do after that. But it's sort of a stroke of luck in 2003. My company and I parted ways because they wanted me to go to Arkansas, and the woman I was married to at the time was not going to Arkansas, so therefore I wasn't going to Arkansas. So I left the company, and I had all kinds of time, and I was fortunate to have worked for a company where I made a lot of money. I had enough money to live for a couple of years, and so I started doing what I thought was important. Not that my job was important, but what I thought was truly important. That was the work of helping people, and that was work I started as a teenager, and had done in many ways before I got to Connecticut, but not really since I got to Connecticut. And so I started joining every group that was doing anything about criminal justice, that was doing anything about people who were pushing for the rights for the ability to marry people of the same sex, that were doing things about the environment. I joined everything. And people actually counseled me against that. They said, you know, you got to pick an area that you want to focus on. But I just thought, like, our issues are all connected, and I don't know how to pick an area. So I just stayed with what I was doing. And what happened over time was there were points at which these groups needed to talk to each other. And since I was in a lot of these groups, I became kind of important to that conversation. And I decided I was going to go back to school, get a degree in political science, because at that point, I realized that the work I was doing touched on politics and I wanted to understand it better. So I met this guy named Bill Dyson, right? Former state rep. And Bill Dyson and I kind of just gelled. We just kind of, I don't know what it was. We just kind of got along. Maybe it's because we're both people who can irritate people inside of the political system. Maybe it's because we both are relatively plain spoken. I don't know what it is, but we gelled. And so, you know, over the years between that point in time and when Bill retired, we were in contact, we worked together. And when he was retiring, he came to me the year before he retired and said, you should run for state representative. And by that point, I was a full-fledged activist. So I looked at Bill and told him he was crazy. And that I would not be doing that. But circumstances, as I said, don't work out the way you think they're going to work out. So at that time, I was the head of the Connecticut Federation of Black Democratic Clubs, which had just gotten, as a statewide organization, reconstituted. It still had some chapters across the state, but it wasn't a statewide organization anymore. Some of the original founders had come back together and brought in a new generation of people to do some work. And I was supposed to be going to give a speech for Black History Month. And what came out of my mouth was a really good argument for why I should run for a state representative. And so I went back to Bill and I said, okay, man, I'm running. And it was the year of Barack Obama. And so, you know, there was a lot of hope and excitement. But when I looked at my community and I listened to Barack Obama, I said, you know, I'm not sure his message is really the message of this community, because Black people have always had to be hopeful in order to survive in this country. And so I don't know. I don't know if it's what it should be received the way that he's putting it. And far be it from me to question Barack Obama, but I did. That's just the crazy thing you do when you're young and stupid. And so I actually created. I had a saying that came out of that speech that went on to a campaign sign. And like when you look back on this, you're like, all of this is crazy. And that saying was, it's good that we're talking about hope, but beyond hope is belief, and our mission is to give people a reason to believe again. So let me just say this to you. If you campaign and you put that on your signs and it's on your literature and it's everywhere, you can't go to the General Assembly and be like, so I'm going to hang out in the back for a little bit and see what's going on. So when I actually was elected, I was like, I've got to do something, right? And Bill and I had both been supporters of abolishing the death penalty. He'd been working on it for years. And I was like, what if we abolish the death penalty? And everybody, I mean, the Connecticut Network to abolish the death penalty, activists who really wanted to do it were like, well, you can work on it, but you should be careful about telling people you're going to actually move this thing. Because at that point, it hadn't gotten out of the House or the Senate ever. And most of the time, it didn't even make it to one of the chambers. But I am a person who, and I teach this to my children, I just believe that you don't know what can be done until you've tried it. Right? It's not that you're overconfident. You literally do not know. And so what I would say to people is, well, we don't know because I haven't been here and you haven't been here with me and we haven't been here together. So let's go do this thing with the notion in mind, we're going to abolish the death penalty. And they were like, okay, freshman, we'll kind of follow you, but it ain't happening. At the end of the session, we had moved the bill out of the House and moved the bill out of the Senate and put it on the governor's desk. And that's a bill that I'm still known for. But what we've been able to do in the last decade and a half, it's not just the death penalty. We've been able to pass a bill that gave transgender people rights that they didn't have in Connecticut because there were no rights in public accommodation for them. We've been able to pass the First in the Nation Trust Act, which says that Connecticut is a sanctuary state. People are still having conversations in the state about whether you have sanctuary cities. We're a sanctuary state. We have the first prosecutorial transparency bill in the nation, the first racial and ethnic impact statements on demand. And you could go on and on and on. And none of that is because I'm special. It is because I come to every issue and say, I don't know what can be done. And since I don't know, the way I approach it is there a question that hasn't been asked? Is there a step that hasn't been taken? Is there a thing that has not been done? And I think that approach is huge when it comes to the issues of our most disaffected communities. This last year, I guess the last several months, we passed the police accountability bill. And that's an emotional issue that brings up everything that we talk about when we talk about the issues of America and what America is and race and the intersection of race and gender and the intersection of power. And the people made that issue everything but what it was about. To me, it's simple. The government allows people to have the ultimate power over life. And so they have to have responsibility if they're going to have that power. There's an uneven power distribution between the police and all of us. But when that power distribution is put on top of our history of racism and white supremacy, it's lethal. And so for me, I had been working on this issue. There were bills that we don't call police accountability bills that I'd done for years. And then in 2015, I did the first multi-section police accountability bill that was similar to the one in 2020. In 2019, I did another one. And then, of course, in 2020, we did the big 40-section plus bill. And when I saw the George Floyd incident, it was the beginning of June, literally the 1st of June, when I was talking to the press and said, we're going to do a bill. Now, I hadn't talked to my colleagues. I hadn't talked to my leadership. I hadn't talked to the governor, but we were going to do a bill. And as a matter of fact, we hadn't really even had protests yet, maybe one. But I was of the mind that we were going to do a bill because I thought in this moment it was necessary to say to people that we're going to respond. And it's interesting when you look around that across the country, nothing happened. The federal government didn't do anything. The states of the country didn't do anything, but we did something in Connecticut. And it is not about what people have made it about. It's not about a distaste for police officers or a hatred for police officers. I have some of them in my family. If you look, I tell people all the time, if you look at my wedding picture, there are 4 or 5 guys in my groomsmen. 3 of them are police officers. That's not what this is about. This is about making sure that government is responsive and that people know that when they seek help from the government is going to be there. Um, and so that's just a little bit about who I am and the perspective that I have. And I didn't want to go on for 30 minutes because I think oftentimes we talk very long and don't say very much. And I just wanted to give you opportunities to ask whatever questions you have, and I will answer anything you have. So there you go.
Carl, you ready to read some questions?
I mean, I can go look for them too if you want.
Yeah, I can do it. Oh, there he is. Okay.
I just didn't want to, we had 2 Zooms going at once, so they wanted to feedback. So the first question is from Robert Wormy. My apologies if I mispronounce people's names. Is there any consideration being given in the General Assembly for the conduct of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to record racist acts and to record racist acts in Connecticut and promote healing, as has been started in Maryland?
So that has not really, it hasn't really been a conversation here. I think if I'm remembering correctly, there's been minor conversation about that, but it hasn't been a real conversation here. And I would say Connecticut's an very interesting state. So while we're considered a blue state and sometimes even a progressive state, as soon as we get on to issues of race, I'm not sure that that's true anymore. If you've watched any of the conversations where race comes up in the General Assembly, a lot of people are actually shocked. And I would say that the police accountability bill, because it got so much press, brought a lot of eyes to issues that would not normally be on issues. And I can't tell you the number of people who were stunned that some of the things that were said by some of the people who represent the state of Connecticut. But to this point, that hasn't been a conversation. I would be willing to engage in that conversation. I would also suggest to people that would be a very heavy lift, much heavier than it should be.
The next question is from Maria Lamberto. Can we legalize pot in Connecticut?
So we are having if you've been paying attention, we've been having this conversation for several years. We're having a very serious conversation about the legalization of cannabis. And I think that beyond the fight that we have to have around legalization of cannabis, the real issue is whether or not we get the equity portion of this correct, right? And that's not just whether we erase the sentences of people who've been convicted, but what we do with the monies that come back from cannabis. What do we do for making sure that communities of color that have been affected are able to participate in the economy built? And the governor now has a committee of people who are looking at that. And because it's going to come through my committee, my thing has been I am ready to legalize cannabis as long as we get the equity portion correct. Because there are states that have done this and they said they had an equity portion and it amounted to nothing. And so if we can figure out the equity portion, I'm happy to help jump into the middle of that fight. But if we can't figure that out, I'm not going to be a supporter of it. So it is to be told whether we can do it or not. But I think a huge part of that is whether or not we figure out how to deal with the equity issue.
Thank you. Next from Aleth Fatherly. She says, hi, Senator Winfield. Aleth Fatherly here from Wilton Quaker Meeting. I live in Fairfield and we are in the early stages of starting a race equity task force. Westport has other related initiatives, and I would like to know if we could work collectively to create a blueprint that we can all use in the spirit of time management. Please share any suggestions that can make this effort more effective in a timely fashion.
I think that's a huge conversation. I will leave my information. I don't know that I can do that right now, but I'll leave my phone number and email in the chat. And then I think that's we can have further conversation on that if that works.
And Susan asks a kind of a follow-up question regarding the Truth and Reconciliation. Does Truth and Reconciliation being such a heavy lift, does that reflect a deeper hidden layer of racism in Connecticut?
To me, it's not that hidden, but I think it is hidden from view for a lot of people. I also think people just don't recognize. Look, when we talk about the privilege that we call white privilege, some people tried to explain it using various ways. Some people describe it as the kind of thing that we talk about with fish, right, where they don't understand the water that they swim in because it's always there. It is just that people refuse to get it. And they refuse to get how centering themselves in a conversation is exactly what we talk about. So if you watch the police accountability debate, I said over and over to people, yes, it's not happening in your community, but this is not about your community. But people have a hard time not seeing, if they don't see themselves in an issue, then they just don't see that it's an issue. And what I've tried to say to people is women have all kinds of issues that I don't have, right? It doesn't mean they don't have issues. And most people get that, right? And if I said to a woman, whatever her issue is, well, I don't have that, so it doesn't exist, people would say I'm crazy. But when it comes to race, it's acceptable. So I think, I don't know, I take the point, and I think for most people the answer would be yes. But I think for the people who are experiencing the repercussions of it, that many of them would tell you it's not actually that hidden, but it doesn't matter. The fact is, it is. And I think we need to acknowledge that it is, even here in our state, and deal with it.
Thank you. My own question for you is, how do you see the relationship between activism and legislative action? How do they inform one another?
So as an activist who cannot reform myself, I see them as intimately tied if we want to get things of consequence done. And I have operated in such a way that I've always believed that on the deeper, more important issues, you have to have a connection between the people inside the building and the people outside the building. And I think part of the reason why we've seen people for years operate and not be able to get things done is because the legislator thinks that he can do it without the activist, and the activist thinks he can do it without the legislator. And that's just not true. When I'm working and the legislator is just doing their own thing on these issues, they often at the end of the day are like, I can't believe we didn't get it done. It's like, well, it didn't work last time, right? You didn't do the work of building a campaign around the issue. You didn't do the work of public informing the public. You didn't do all of that work, which you cannot do because you're stuck in the building working on all the things that you're working on. And so I spend a lot of time on these issues directly in conversation with the people who are doing the work on the ground. Behind the scenes, oftentimes talking to them about what needs to happen coming into the building. Sometimes a strategy that says, look, the other side doesn't have to know, or even my side doesn't have to know we're working together, so that you can come to the building and tell me what a dirtbag I am, so that I can turn around and say, hey, I have no choice. These people are pushing on me. And I think that the legislator and the activists and the organizers need to figure out how to tie themselves together better so that they can make progress, so that the legislator is informed by the activist and the activist is informed by the legislator.
Thank you. From Marilyn Vache, the Juneteenth agenda is broad. Which areas are you most involved with? And which ones need the most support from the public, and what kind of support?
It's an interesting question, given that you're asking me since I wrote the thing. So I'm involved in all of them. And if you've seen my style, I am not just saying I'm literally involved in all of them. I think that and this is going to seem like a strange answer because it doesn't actually answer the question in the way the question was asked. But I think given that race undergirds all of this, I think they all need a lot of help, because in order to get them done, you will have conversations that people do not want to have. And so you got to have a motive force, which is not my powerful rhetoric, right? That's not what it is. It's the notion that this is a concern for people. It's the notion that there are repercussions for not paying attention to the issue, and that is something that happens beyond myself or any legislator. It is the thing that only the people outside of the building can do, and I really think that's an important thing. And any of you who've heard me speak for more than 15 minutes have probably heard me say this. On almost every issue, almost no one contacts us. It's just what it is. And so when people begin to contact us on an order of 5, 10, 15, 20 people, we start to say something's going on here. Now, I know the general public usually thinks, well, I don't have 1,000 people to contact them, but you don't need 1,000 people. You've got to be able to get 5, 10, 15 people so that the legislator says, what is going on? Because most of the time, no one says anything. And when people discover that, they realize I can do that, right? I mean, I have 6 people in my house. And it changes their feeling that they can be effective as activists, because you can be. So that would be how I answer that question. Yeah.
Thank you. I have combination question from Judy Michael and Paul Hammer. From Judy, my question concerns the PROTECT Act to end solitary confinement, which includes a demand to close Northern Correctional Facility. I'm curious about the legislative strategy to close Northern. What are your thoughts about our chances going this route? And then from Paul Hammer, he's heard you talk about the campaign to end solitary confinement. And could you address the rationale for this legislation? To use this bill as an example, what is your approach to making compromises when they may be necessary to get a bill passed in a divided legislature?
Okay. That's a lot of question. So hi, Judy. I'll start with the strategy part of the question. I usually come with the most radical version of the bill first. No matter what version you come with, people are going to push you back off of wherever you started, at least with the issues I work with. Other issues you can get them through, but the issues I work with are not easy issues to work with. So I come with a strong version. And I don't do that just as a strategy. I do that because I'm trying to stay as close to that version as possible, and everybody knows it. So I know that there's going to be a strong push against me because they know that I'm trying to keep the strongest version. But if you don't do that, knowing how things work, knowing that there are levers of pressure on everyone, including the leadership, including the governor, then what you wind up with is something that does nothing, right? Not that it doesn't do much of anything, it does nothing. And I'm not there. That's not what I'm there to do. And so I'm willing to do what is necessary to get something that matters done. And I think that what I've told people who are not in the building, who don't have the same set of pressures that I have, who don't have the same responsibilities I have, part of what's going to help me is how hard you push. Because sometimes people just think that this is about whether the good guys are willing to do a bill or not, and whether there are no good guys and there are no bad guys. There are people who have interests, and sometimes those interests align with yours, but they don't always align with yours. And when you find somebody in that building who aligns with you more often than not, that is a great thing. But I don't look at it as good guys and bad guys, because what I see as bad is exactly what some people are asking these people to do. It's sometimes atrocious as I think it is. What is important is that people recognize the value of their voice in that space. Look, the issue of solitary confinement, we shouldn't treat people like that. I don't even know what else to say. It's that simple. We should not treat people like that. If you are isolated from people, there are effects on you that begin almost immediately. Not in prison. just if you're isolated from people. When you find yourself in your room because you have the cold or a flu and you haven't been out in days, you start to feel things. You start to feel different. You start to feel like you might be losing part of it. Just think about that. In your room with your rug, the way you like your rug, and your bed as plush as you like it with your television, you strip all of that away. You reduce the size of that so that you can almost touch the side of each wall. You make it hard. You make it cold. You make it filled with noise. You make it in a place where you know you're not leaving for a very long time. And then you do it not for a couple of days, but for a week, 2 weeks, a year. Some people spend 7, 8 years over the course of their time incarcerated in these spaces. We should not do that to human beings. So for me, that's what it's about. There are other ways to do this. And there's nothing about solitary that actually makes any of us better. We have science that tells us that. We have experience that tells us that. We choose to torture people because it's what we've done. We used to torture people, in terms of them being at their place of work, right? We used to torture, like, just because we've done it shouldn't be the thing that we do. So to me, it is important. And what helps me to understand how ridiculous the strategy we have in Connecticut is when we brought, and Judy could probably tell you this, when we brought the solitary cell to the state. So a couple of years ago, we brought the solitary confinement cell to the state so people could get a sense of what it is to be in one of these cells. And I waited for a while to let legislators go in, and nobody went in for more than like 10 minutes, maybe 15 at the most. But most legislators didn't even go in. And then I said, I'm going in, and I'm going to stay in. I'm going to stay in all day. Well, I went in, I was in there for an hour, and for some reason I had to come out, right? So then I was like, I'm going back in, and then at 3 hours, my colleagues couldn't watch me sit there. They put people into these cells all the time, but they couldn't watch me sit in a cell where if I wanted to, I could open the door on my own. Couldn't watch it. And yet somehow they could justify leaving human beings in cells where they can't open the door, where the sounds they're hearing are actually the sounds of other human beings experiencing that trauma, not piped in sounds, and just leave them there. We shouldn't be doing it at all. We can't justify doing it. So for me, it has to end. What is the likelihood of it ending? Well, no, I think we are making progress on this though. I think it is harder for people to just see this as these are bad guys that we're throwing in there. And the reason for that is because people aren't just coming and having a conversation with us, but they're having a conversation with the public. And you have legislators like myself who aren't just like, oh, I'll put your bill in, and like who will go in a cell for 5-6 hours and sit there and have the press see it. So I think we're making progress. I think we have a shot at it. I don't know, but I am putting in the Protect Act for Stop Solitary. And it is one of the major bills that I'm pushing for the session.
Alita Jones asks, the Greater Hartford Interfaith Action Alliance is trying to get Governor Lamont to declare that racism is a public health crisis. What can you do to get Lamont to declare this? Another concern is welfare liens. Where do you stand on abolishing welfare liens in Connecticut?
So I've already, at GIA's meeting, I've already said that I'm for abolishing the welfare liens. For getting Governor Lamont to move on the issue, if I could figure out how to get Governor Lamont to move on any of my issues, we'd have let more people out of prison during COVID. We would have done a lot of stuff. When it comes to any of the issues that touch on criminal justice, even many of the issues that deal with the issue of race directly, I don't think he's great at it. It's not native to him. He seems uncomfortable with this stuff and tends to lean to a more conservative point of view. In April, the end of April, May, and June, I was in a paper every day almost. I think I had 30 plus articles pushing on the governor to deal with the issue of COVID in the prisons. Many didn't do much, but they were irritated by it, and it was made clear to me that they were irritated by it. But I think the problem is that people expect me to say these things, right? Like if you've listened to me ever, you could guess without me saying anything to you what my position is on most things. And you'd probably be right 90% of the time. And so I think, in a sense, it's easy to ignore that call coming from me, but it's not easy to ignore that call if it's coming from people outside, particularly people outside in places that don't normally make those calls. And so the work that I'm doing now is to get that voice lifted from people who aren't the usual suspects, so that I can go into the legislature and do the kind of work that we want. The governor's tough on these issues. That doesn't mean he can't be moved, because the one thing that I know about him is I did irritate them, and they don't really like that. I'm kind of breaking protocol, right? There's a lot of grousing that goes on about what the governor is doing, but not a lot of people are going to say it. I'm just going to say it because I'm not trying to be part of any particular team, except that team that my mother was trying to be a part of that does the going back work. And so at the end of the day, if they don't like it, okay, well, I guess I won't get whatever benefit I'm supposed to get. But we need people who aren't myself and the usual suspects to be the voices on this.
Thank you. Susan asks, what can grassroots regular people do to reduce racism in daily life?
I think that there's a lot to unpack there. Let me say that, and this may be, let me just say what I'm going to say. So on election day, I am talking to some people who consider themselves part of the resistance. And I start to get a feeling that I've had periodically in the last 4 years, that's a combination of frustration, bewilderment, anger. And the reason is because as I'm listening to these people who are part of the resistance, what I'm hearing is something that makes no sense to me. They're hoping that Trump loses. They are hoping that he takes his rhetoric with him, whatever anybody believes about it, they're hoping he takes his rhetoric with him. And the one thing that they are kind of regretting, not every one of them, but many of them, is that the holidays are coming and they're going to have to deal with their uncle, cousin, brother, son, whatever, who agrees with Trump or sees some validity in his point of view or some iteration on the theme. And they can't do that. And as I listen to that, I think to myself, what are you resisting? I don't know what you're resisting. Resistance is a difficult thing. And the one thing that is difficult, dealing with the people you cannot or do not want to do. But the easy thing of saying, well, Trump is this or Trump is that, which means nothing. It literally has no meaning, right? Like, it's just your feeling, you're emoting. It doesn't change what Trump's doing. If it did, he wouldn't have operated as he did during his presidency. But the actual resisting is not happening. And so when I talk to people, I say, look, the first thing you could do is make sure that you've engaged the people in your life who believe as he believes, who see things as he sees things, who believe that there isn't a problem of white supremacy, who believe there isn't a problem of racism, because Trump doesn't really matter. What matters is that in our society, this is still a thing, that it impacts our lives, that my mother, Araminta, and her mother, Harriet, and her mother, Araminta, and her mother, Harriet, all shared the same dream, all of them, that someday their children will be treated as fully human in America. And that my daughter, who is Imani Harriet, probably in this United States of America will share that same dream. That's what we should be resisting. And so do that work. Do the work of dealing with the people in your lives who are part of that. Speak truth to power, yes, but also be engaged in all of the things we're talking about. Gain the power to move things, because if you simply speak truth to power, it doesn't matter either. People in power love people speaking truth in the streets and not being in the halls where it happens, because you have no power in the halls where it happens. Malcolm X said that You have to speak to a man in a language that he understands. People in power understand power. If you're speaking truth to them, they're clapping and applauding you. Sometimes they'll stand with you. I watched that happen in New Haven. Um, Speak power back to them. Do those things. Those are the things that move something. Um, that's how I would answer that question. And look, I know we're getting close to time, and I don't know if we have to jump off right at the end of time, but I will stay to answer all the questions. So if I'll answer them if you have time.
Thank you. Maureen Lopes asks, are you receiving different messages about racial justice priorities from younger and older activists?
It's a hodgepodge. There are young, obviously, young people tend to be more progressive on it than the older people, but it's really a hodgepodge. And I think it also depends on how much you've actually engaged on it. There are people who are passionate about this, but they haven't done any study of what this country is, what our history is. It's all over the map. And I think that's good because wherever I find people, I say to them, there's work that you need to do, right? There's more work that you need to do to understand how we get to this moment, what this moment actually means. And that's good because there's more work I need to be doing. And as I said, except for a brief break when I first came to Connecticut, I've been doing this kind of work since I was 18. I'm about to be 47. That's not an insignificant stretch of time, right? That's almost 30 years of this kind of work. But there's always more to learn, but it just makes you better, right? And more to experience, more. Yeah. So I'll just leave that there.
Paul Hammer asks, how can we best work to see that the state and municipalities adhere to the spirit and the letter of the Police Accountability Act? And how can we work to see that the law is understood, enforced, and embraced?
So I think pressure on people in government locally matters. Well, let's be honest. There are going to be places in the state where they don't want to understand it. What we did is not hard to understand. I've heard everything that people are saying. It is not difficult to understand. There's no threat to anybody if they just go to work, do their job, and don't do the things they're not supposed to do. Really, at the end of the day, it's that simple. On the issue of governmental immunity, this is where people, we don't know what this means, and well, it's going to mean a whole bunch of people are getting sued. And so you have to violate somebody's civil rights. You have to be doing this in a malicious, willful, or wanton way. You have to then go to a court. You have to be convicted. Like, this is not a radical change. As a matter of fact, what we did in Connecticut is we said, when they came up with qualified immunity in 1967, it meant one thing. In 2020 America, it means something completely different. Let me explain what it could mean. It doesn't mean it necessarily means this, but the way the construct is set up, it means that because of the issue of George Floyd, the set of facts in the George Floyd case, which I haven't met a person who was like, yeah, that's good. That's a good thing. Because of that set of facts, because of it being so unique, you potentially couldn't pierce qualified immunity in that case. Does anybody think that makes sense? No. But this is what we turned qualified immunity into. And so what we did was we said, well, we're a state. We can't abolish qualified immunity because that's a federal concept. But what we can do is create a cause of action in the state of Connecticut that makes it more like what it was before, so that when these things happen, you have the ability to go to court to seek recourse. That's simple. You can explain that. On police use of force, we've been having conversations about police use of force since before I did the 2015 bill. We've been clear on what we want people to do and not do since before that. We've made changes to the use of force all along the way. Very simple. And I could go through the bill point by point by point. As a matter of fact, I had many conversations, despite what people say, with the police unions, with the police chiefs, with the state police, and they got it. But they don't want the changes. So then they go out to the public and they say, we don't know what it is, and he wouldn't talk to us. That's what's going on here. So I don't engage too much in the conversations about whether people understand it or not. Whether they understand it or not, largely it's about whether they want to understand it. But if you're asking what you can do is put pressure on them and ask them what is it they don't understand, because they'll speak about this in broad terms, but the bill is right there. Anybody can read it. It's 2020-6004. Pull a bill, ask them, what don't you understand about this? Because it seems rather plain language, and see what that conversation is. But the mere fact that people are engaged, I think, is important. So I think that's what people can do.
Patricia Wallace asks, the property tax is how we pay for schools, and the major cities always lose because of the way the system is set up to benefit the suburbs. What can be done?
So we have reworked the formula that deals with education over and over again. This is the problem with trying to deal with those things, right? So when years ago when they did, they're the kids, by the way. Years ago when they were working on this formula, in order to get it passed, right? Because you don't have just New Haven, Hartford, Bridgewater, Waterbury. In order to get it passed, they had to make compromises with the other municipalities in order to get it passed. And those compromises always are going to benefit those municipalities. But also, like, look, if you're New Haven with a, depending on what year, 42, 43 mill rate, and you get X amount of dollars in education funding, you're not going to be throwing in a whole bunch of extra money on top of that, right? But if you're a municipality that has a 17 mill rate, it's huge. You have a lot of space to potentially throw in money. So we come to this differently, and I don't have an answer for that. What I do know is that answer is not going to be generated by an individual legislator or even a group of legislators. That really is that is one of the issues of the type where it really requires that the public themselves say, we're frustrated with this because we've had all kinds of things that we've tried over the years and it just doesn't go anywhere, because you have a legislature that is dominated by the suburbs and communities that fixing this, whatever that means to individuals, doesn't benefit them. So that's not the most satisfying answer, but it's a very real answer. And it kind of lays out what the problem is.
Thank you. Mary Gorham asks, and it's a little long one, does the Clean Slate bill take into account the need to know of the employer, landlord, etc., of the crime someone has committed? If not, might it? She says, here's why I ask. A school might very much want to know if an applicant for a teaching job had enticed a minor, whereas a construction company looking to hire a construction worker probably wouldn't care so much about that crime. If you were to rent out a room in your house, you might care a lot if someone had robbed houses, whereas if you were hiring someone to do forestry work, you probably wouldn't care so much if they had robbed a house years ago. Wouldn't taking this need to know factor into account help get the bill passed by opening up more opportunities for people who have served time while providing a measure of safety where there may be more of a sense of vulnerability for certain employers and landlords for particular Class C and D felonies?
I don't agree with many people who talk about the need to know. Let me first say that all kinds of sexual offenses and offenses against kids have already been negotiated away before I ever even started. So there's that. But what I say to people all the time is, what do you actually know, except that they committed a crime? What do you know? You know they committed a crime, and therefore you're going to treat them like they committed that crime yesterday and they're the same person, right? That's what's normally going to happen. But do you know enough about what happens after a certain period of time and the likelihood that that person's the same? Do you know enough about the psychology involved? What do you know? Because if you don't know that, then you're making a decision based purely on fear, but not the actual person in front of you. And there are a lot of people who disagree with me. I get it. I understand it. And I expect it. But I also think that my mom told me when I was a kid that if I had committed a crime, she was going to be fine with me going to jail. She might even march me to the jail, right? But she expected that when it was over that I would be able to come out and do whatever I needed to do and move on with my life. And we have so many carve outs whenever we talk about this thing that we effectively have nothing. So that the people who we put in our prisons, in our jails, come out and they just are left to struggle and they're effectively in a prison for the rest of their lives. And so I say to people that if they disagree with me, that's fine. This is what this is about. Have the conversation, fight against me. But the fight that I am having is a fight for us to live up to what we tell people. You do the crime, you do the time. The time isn't the rest of your life. And so you get out, you do what you're supposed to do for a certain number of years, and you have the opportunity to have your record erased. And if you commit another crime, send them to jail. That's how it works. You have plenty of people who are full of evil intent who have no record because they haven't committed a crime yet. And you treat them like they're a great upstanding citizen. But simply because I did something in my past, I'm treated as that person I was on that day for the rest of my life. I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. It's not what I have been taught by the society I live in. It's not what I've been taught by the religion that I believe in. And it's not how I will act as a legislator. So again, I mean, people are going to disagree with that. I get it. But given what we've already taken out of the bill, I don't think that we should be adding any more carve outs.
Thank you. Robert Werman asks, it sounds like you are passionate about our need to move to a system of restorative versus punitive justice. Are you writing legislation to address creating this reform?
So I have in the past put all forms of restorative justice bills in. I haven't worked on that for the upcoming session. As I said, I'm working on cannabis and clean slate and solitary. I just don't think I'm going to have the bandwidth given what the session is probably going to look like and a number of huge bills that I'm working. I'm also vice chair of the Energy Committee and will be working on hopefully working on all of the equity related things in the energy bill, energy committee. So that's a lot. That's not to say it's not important in that in subsequent sessions when I have a little more bandwidth, I won't be working on it, but I don't have a specific agenda for that right now. But again, as I said, if people want to work on something, I will take it up. I just don't know that there's enough bandwidth for me, right, to do it. There are plenty of legislators who should be working on all of this stuff. I'll say something that'll probably get me in trouble at some point. And that's part of the problem. Not all of them are doing the work that they should be doing. And that's why it's hard to, like, there are a lot of things that we need to do yesterday. But you just can't do that. You just can't because we need more people doing the work.
Maureen Lopes asks, we will need to move away from fossil fuels entirely soon. This affects every aspect of our lives. There are proposals like the Green New Deal that link social justice and creation of green jobs to this huge change in how our society works. What needs to be put in place to make sure this change is implemented in a way that incorporates equity and environmental justice?
I think that it would be nice if you had a governor who ran on that kind of thing. I think you need leadership from the top on this, and not like the kind of leadership that suggests that we're going to figure this out, but we can't really get to that space. That's insane, and it's going to hurt business and all. We have a planet that we're killing. I mean, it'll happen after I'm dead because I'm old enough to benefit from that, I guess. But I have kids and I probably will have grandkids someday, and I'd like them to have a planet to live on. And even if we don't destroy the planet, communities of color have this PM2.5 particulate matter that's in their communities and all kinds of, if you know the story, you know the story, right? But I think it is going to require leadership from the top to say, we have lost our minds. And it is time to stop acting like we don't have minds because we do. Because the legislature, without that, is pushing a bill up the hill, a ball up the hill, and it keeps rolling back down. Right? That's what we're doing. And you need the governor to signal to the legislature, I want you to move in this direction. And when you get that ball up to the top and you push it over, I'm going to sign it. That's what we need. And we don't have that for all that the governor may or may not be doing. We don't have that. We have not had that. And it's hard, right? Because you're going to have the interests that don't want to do the things we talked about. Look, we were talking about transportation and climate initiative, whatever people think about that, about a year ago before the governor said, we're not doing that. And he said, we're not doing that without much conversation. Now I will tell you, right before that, he had come to the discussion they were having here in New Haven when they had their conference and said, this is great. And then turned around and said, we're not doing that without conversation. Because what they were talking about was, a cap and trade style system, and people who benefit from doing the things they're doing don't like that. Well, they're not going to like any of the stuff that we need to do, right? So you need a governor who's going to say, I know you don't like it, but we're going to do it because we have to. So
there's a quick question from Marilyn Vache. When are you running for governor, Senator Winfield?
When the work calls me to do it. That's the answer to that.
And I think the last question we have for tonight is from Diane Keefe. It's, what about suggesting releasing all prisoners over the age of 50 convicted of non-violent crimes? And then what is possible this spring? I think referring to the legislative agenda.
I would say to Diane, while I'm beginning to answer the question, can you clarify the second part of that question about what's possible this spring? So in this time of COVID, we have run every scenario to the governor possible. I worked with the ACLU on a document that I think is like 15 pages that laid out everything we could possibly do. Releasing people over the age of 50, just difficult. He's not trying to hear. He's not trying to hear that we automatically release people over that age, or even over the age of 65, who have certain issues of comorbidity. And I will say part of the problem here too is that Connecticut has a medical release, a compassionate release statute that don't operate in the way that we colloquially would speak about it, right? So when I talk about compassion, I mean compassion the way we think about it. But the way those two statutes work is you have to be darn near deaf in order to get compassion. And that's not what we're talking about right now. So one of the things that I'm working on is rewriting the statute, which I come to understand is irritating some people because they don't think we should have actual compassion for the people in the prisons, which I have to say irritates me to no end. So we've got to go back and look at the systems that we've had in place, how they've been set up, and make them actually apply to the world in which we live. And that is the work that I'm doing. But we certainly aren't operating in a way where we're saying, people over 50 are going to be more likely. And if they're people who we might be able to release at some time in the future, can we release them now? That's not what we're doing, unfortunately. But I'm trying to push us in that direction. And I actually hopefully have a conversation with the governor's staff sometime this week again about this very issue.
Yeah, Gary, this is Diane. I was just asking because I think if all of us work around something that we think is achievable, there's a chance that maybe just over 65, maybe that group, that's a bigger group than what they've already let out. And I just think we need to have a consistent demand. Power concedes nothing without a specific demand. But thank you so much.
I agree with you. What I would say is if you're interested in that, if you go back and find my information, you shoot me an email. I will contact you back after my conversation with the governor's staff. That way I'll know where we're headed. And maybe we could think about it together. There are other people working on it, but it's always good to have more people involved.
Thank you. I'm supposed to close it out, but I have one more question. if you don't mind, the Energy Efficiency Fund, the Eversource just does such a terrible job with it, and most low-income people don't even get access to it. And I think the money should be taken back from Eversource, the Energy Efficiency Fund money, and stop giving them the chance to market, because what you need to have is just energy audits where people go in and they figure out what insulation is needed, what weather stripping is needed, and then the money needs to go to low-income communities to pay for that stuff, because it's still a couple of $100. And
Right.
most people who are low income don't even have a couple $100 to spend on it, but it'll be better for the environment, it'll be better for the communities, it'll be better for jobs.
I mean,
Can
I
you
think
work on that?
I think that's an idea that we certainly should be exploring. As I said, I'm back on the energy. I haven't been on the energy committee in a couple of years. I'm back on the energy committee. I will have a chair. I have a conversation with the chair about that very thing during the session, and certainly keep you all informed as to what's going on there. I will just say, since I saw it, that there was a question about the agenda for the upcoming session. There isn't a place where there's an agenda posted, because one, we don't have an agenda yet. Legislators are figuring out what push is being made on them by their constituents, and beginning to put bills in the next couple of weeks. But if you go to the website that we have, cga.ct.gov, you can look at all of the committees. There's a hyperlink to all of the committees. And when you go there, each committee has a bill record book. And that's where you can see what bills are introduced in the committee. And if you see a bill that you like, there's another place where you can go on the website that says bill tracking. You can enter the bill in there, and you can get emails sent to you about what's happening with the bill. So you will know as the session goes on whether the bill went from just being introduced to being raised, if it gets a public hearing, and everything that happens with that bill along the way. And that's how you can stay informed and not have to try to get one of us to keep sending you information. It will automatically be generated and sent to you.
Thank you. Thank you for all your time tonight. It was great.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to Maureen or Kim. Thank you very much, Senator Winfield.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. People have asked where we're going to put this recording. We're going to put it on the website of the New Haven Friends meeting. And I would encourage people, as you said, not very many people get in touch with the state legislators about their particular issues. So I would encourage people to do that. So thank you so much, Senator Winfield, and for everyone participating.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night, all.
Thank you very much.
Night.
Night.
Nice holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Senator Winfield.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.